This is an episode of Unconfined, the podcast of the Johns Hopkins Center for a Livable Future in Baltimore, Maryland. Unconfined is a podcast about industrial food animal production and its emerging alternatives. You can find us online at clf.jhsph.edu. Mike Milley is our sound engineer and produced our theme music. Your hosts are me, Christine Grillo, and Tom Philpott. Paulette O'Leary is our producer, and Natalie Woodwright is the executive producer. The opinions expressed here are not necessarily those of Johns Hopkins University or of the Center for a Livable Future. Today we have special guest Michelle Hughes, who is the co-executive director of the National Young Farmers Coalition. She's been a hog farmer, and she was a member of USDA's Equity Commission under the Biden administration. Today we'll talk about how a recent USDA funding freeze affects her work, among other topics. Welcome, Michelle, and thank you for joining us on Unconfined.
Thanks for having me.
Maybe we can just start by talking briefly about the National Young Farmers Coalition, and you can tell me about what it is that your organization does with and for young farmers and how you do that.
Sure. Yeah, so Young Farmers is an organization that was started just over 10 years ago in the Hudson Valley. A group of young farmers got together and we're facing very similar challenges to each other, mostly around land access. And that became sort of the backbone of our work. We were a small but mighty team of 3 at the time. So this was like between 2010 and 2014, the organization came to be. And a lot of the work that we've expanded now to about 47 staff has come from really the root of that, which was land access. So we focus on the mission of Young Farmers as an organization is to advance equitable policy and create material benefit for the next generation of working farmers. And we represent those farmers in a way that we are in community with them. So Young Farmers is a grassroots community-led organization that uses our relationships and feedback mechanisms at the local level to create policy that can be applied on a national scale. And so we focus primarily on federal policy because of its influence on the Farm Bill, and that being the biggest piece of legislation for the food and farm systems in the U.S. So we are an advocacy organization that, like many others, has an organizing arm and a policy arm. And we do a little bit of farmer mental health and technical assistance as well, sprinkled in there.
Okay, great. So maybe just quickly you can tell us, are there particular kinds of policy or particular types of programs that the coalition has relied upon until recently? Or, what are the big pillars policy-wise?
Absolutely. Yeah. So like I said, we have a lot of feedback mechanisms. We did a national survey. The results came out in 2022. And a lot of our policy work is based on the results of the national survey. So you'll see in the results of that, young farmers stating many of their challenges lying around land access to capital, access to health care, access to adequate housing. For some folks who are in the farm worker community, access to regular labor protections in their workplace and protective equipment, adequate breaks, things like that. And so we focus most of our policy asks around changes for those things that will really create a benefit for young farmers in their day-to-day production. A lot of agriculture policy is about moving money around. It's just sort of the name of the game in policy, right? Like it's what we're all talking about. It's where money ends up going all the time. But it really does have an impact on farmers' day-to-day lives, these like national policies that affect all of us from USDA that trickle down through our networks. So I can say a little bit more about that. A lot of we support marker bills in Congress. So we have champions in Congress that put marker bills forward that we're supportive of, that we try to educate people around. And that's sort of like the advocacy work that we do, the grass tops work of young farmers exist primarily around that. Our biggest ask was the Land Access and Security Opportunities Act, which is otherwise known as LASSO, in our network. And it was an ask for a really sizable investment in land access for the next generation of young farmers. It was an ask for the Farm Bill that still has yet to come out. And it did have a lot of support, although it was like a high line item in terms of budgetary asks for USDA. And then we also have some climate marker bills that we support. Farmer to Farmer Education Act is one of them, which is also referred to as peer to peer. So farmers teaching other farmers about conservation practices and getting compensated for that work. So those are just some examples of the policies that we try to put forward.
And so, policy that's oriented around land access and security for your constituents, how does that work? Is that the farmers get a loan or they get grants for land? Typically, what's the most successful way for land access?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So I think for young farmers specifically, so there's like lots of ways to get access to land that are not available to young farmers because of the lack of access to capital for them as like a group of folks. And so I think that the easiest way that folks get access to land is like leasing agreements or rental agreements that turn into longer term, right? That is what I see a lot of folks doing in our network. And that can take place on land that is owned by someone privately or is on a conservation easement, right? Like that can really, that runs a spectrum of what's available in that kind of regard. And I think there's opportunity there, but it is still very expensive to lease and rent land. It is extremely expensive to own land. And so we see young farmers who are up against the development industry, frankly, right? Competing for land that they frankly just can't afford. And so there isn't a lot of grant programs within the federal government outside of the Land Capital and Market Access Program, actually. That is the only program that has actually granted money to farmers and community-led farming projects for land acquisition. We haven't really seen a program like that before its time, not in my short time. I'm sure there's been like decades and legacies of land grants across the US, like in history, but in the time that I've been working in agriculture policy, it's a first for us.
We'll jump back and talk about that in just a second, but I'm curious.
Sure.
You mentioned a couple of things that keep popping up on the survey, and one of them is a couple of them are healthcare and housing. How can you describe how those are barriers for young farmers?
Certainly, yeah. And I mean, I'll just give some examples of what we see in our network. And, this is obviously there's a spectrum of young farmer experiences, right? We're not a monolith. So there's a lot of experiences. So I don't mean to generalize that, but I will say that, like other small business owners or entrepreneurs, farmers are generally responsible for their own healthcare if they own their land and the things going into their farm operation. And for those of you that aren't familiar, it's quite expensive to access healthcare outside of the network that is provided to employers that are larger than a small farm operation. And so we're talking about like upwards of like $1,000 in healthcare premiums for young farmers who work a physical job, who can like very easily get hurt on the job at any time. So it is quite dangerous.
$1,000 per month.
Yeah, I would say so, around that. And that's like, I don't know, an average. Like it really depends on where you live, right? And like what kind of access you have. A lot of there are young farmers in urban areas, suburban areas, rural areas, but it also depends on what's available where you live. We do have a number of farmers who are on like state health care, or a program that's like offered through social welfare programming as well. So that's very place-based.
So you mentioned the Land Capital and Market Access Program, and would you be able to just walk us through what that is and what's so amazing about it?
Yeah, absolutely. For young farmers, it's like one of our biggest policy wins. So for years, as I mentioned earlier, Young Farmers was started as an organization that was fighting for land access for the next generation, and that is our bread and butter to this day. And so we were thrilled to hear in the last administration that the Land Capital and Market Access Program was going to come out. So in August of 2022, they announced this program and allocated $300 million from the Inflation Reduction Act to fund it. So it funds community-based projects that increase access to land, capital, and markets for young and underserved producers. When the grant came out, young farmers toyed with the idea of applying, but we ultimately decided to support other folks in our network, like our chapters. We have a large chapter network, some of our partner organizations that we knew would be applying. So we mobilized a rapid response effort around that and recruited grant writers and a national project director to help 19 organizations apply. 13 of them were awarded funding. So we requested in total over probably like $130 million of that money in our network. And we also served on the team that reviewed the applications as well. So the applications in total for the program that came in were like $2.5 billion. And so you can use that as like sort of this metric for the folks that have the ability to put together an application and like put forward their community-led land access project. Like that is the need really of the amount of money. So $300 million is a drop in the bucket. But unfortunately, the program is a lot of the outstanding payments are frozen. And we can talk about that, maybe after if you have any other questions about like the foundation of LCM.
I'm curious about that. The hundreds of millions of dollars that are made available to that program who is the program geared toward? Is it specifically toward young farmers or underserved farmers, or who's it for?
No, it doesn't really have like a specific caveat in that way. That you might have seen, like the discrimination financial assistance program, for example, was like originally supposed to be open to Black farmers, like, and that ended up not happening. But it doesn't have any sort of like specific set aside like that. I mean, that would be great. But I think we did enough outreach and networking that I feel confident that we got a lot of young farmers to apply. I will also say that like the demographic of the folks that I think applied to the program who associate themselves with like a community-led agriculture initiative or farm operation, who are within our network are generally more diverse than the like population of farmers. And so I think they did probably have a lot of young farmers apply because this is like young farmers likes to call this our program, right? Like USDA basically told us that it was modeled after like many years of federal policy asks from our organization and American Farmland Trust and the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition. So, we were happy to see that. And I would like to think that that means a lot of young farmers applied. We did the rapid response, right? And so I think it just by association kind of became that way, but there was no set aside for young farmers.
It's interesting. You mentioned that USDA created this sort of in response or in conversation with farmers and feedback they were getting from farmers. Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah, I mean, years, like a decade of probably more, but yes.
Wow. Okay. So this came out of the Inflation Reduction Act in 2022. And so now that we have a new administration, what's happening with this program?
So basically, we have a ton of outstanding payments. There was like a period of time when we weren't getting any seeing payments go to grantees, even for expenses that were incurred in 2024. And then we saw the Rhode Island federal court preliminary injunction that came out that required USDA and other agencies to release the frozen IRA and IIJA funds specifically. So this is like deep in the weeds of policy, right? But like programs operate under their own jurisdiction. So the Inflation Reduction Act, money allocated through that is under different rules, a set of rules, and will fall into this one lawsuit with another program like IIJA. And then you have like the Farm Bill, which is a completely different process to hold folks accountable to doling out that money properly. So that's the way this is situated. But that federal injunction, it did pass, but it's being appealed. And so basically LCM is held up in the courts right now. in a lot of ways. And the land acquisitions specifically were being held up for a while, which was very concerning to everyone involved.
What on the ground, what are farmers experiencing? Are they purchasing equipment and then not being reimbursed? Are they defaulting on loans? What's happening to people in the field who have relied on this?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's having devastating impacts. I think the LCM freeze alone is certainly not responsible for the like more general impacts we're seeing across because it's just one program, right? Like there have been, I don't even know how many programs affected by federal funding cuts now. I think in ag alone, up almost 50 programs or something like that, like in food and ag alone now. So I think that's like much larger than us. But I think, yeah, you see farmers like we're seeing like half built high tunnels and like these large projects that cost a ton of money that farmers are putting their own personal capital into thinking that they're going to get reimbursed, which is really tough for conservation, right? Like you're doing it in this effort to like conserve the land, mitigate climate change impacts, like all the right reasons. And, there's these amazing programs that came out of the conservation title that in the farm bill that made it so that farmers have like things half built. And I think that's like on the lighter side. I've heard stories of farmers having to furlough employees, lay them off, like they're losing their workforce. There are farmers who are operating on very little. Maybe some of them are even closing down because of this. Like, you know, it there's a spectrum of impacts depending on how much federal funding you are relying on as an operation, which the government has set up farmers to rely on the federal government. So it's a strange move for all of us to witness.
Right. Yeah. Are there alternate ways for these farmers to sort of keep their heads above water, or is federal funding pretty much the main game in town?
I mean, I think if you are fortunate and you are someone who is blessed with generational wealth or like people around you that can hold you up, or if you exist in a cooperative where like, you know what I mean, you might have more diversified like access to funds, just that's where this sort of becomes like a survival of the fittest game, right? Like it's the folks who are been in ag for decades who like have the connections, have the community, like have the resources who will probably survive. And then, I mean, we have to give thanks to the many organizations that put forward grants that go directly to farmers, like the nonprofit organizations that use philanthropy and private funding to give money to farmers, some of which I'm sure is used to at least put a down payment on land. Like it's not huge amounts, right? Like Young Farmers had a grant program that was only $5,000 per farmer. But the Braiding Seeds Fellowship, which is available to anyone on the East Coast right now, I think they're expanding, fingers crossed, but that program is a $50,000 grant. And so we're seeing these like other ways that money for land is popping up for young farmers that I think is quite new. When I left farming, there were no $50,000 grants for individuals.
You've mentioned the Farm Bill a couple times, and I'm wondering if you or your organization or people you know have their sights set on anything for the new Farm Bill, or if it's a wash, or, what are your thoughts on that right now?
Yeah, I mean, we're all kind of tied up in this reconciliation thing that's happening, which has like a direct effect on how the Farm Bill will be interpreted as agriculture and food policy moving forward, which I think is like a very big conversation that I am underqualified to facilitate on a podcast, but is really interesting for me to think about and like the role the Farm Bill will play based on what happens in reconciliation. But yeah, I mean, I think we're all really worried about SNAP. And it's like, SNAP and EBT is not even like the main, like we don't work on nutrition assistance and hunger at Young Farmers in a central way. It is very much tangential to our work. We support many partners who lead on that, right? But it's not our thing. And it's so dire that like we are now starting to like join coalitions for SNAP and like do a little bit of deeper partnership work around that because it is such a big part of the Farm Bill. So that's what everyone is focused on right now. And like trying to see how the Farm Bill is going to even come out of reconciliation, like what it's going to look like, I think is, it's sort of it feels like a little, like very much scarcity mentality and like survival and just like trying to protect the things that you can over dreaming, unfortunately. Like it's just not that chapter right now. Um, and I think if you work in policy, this is like you have to be able to weather these changes, is what I'm learning. It's what people who have been in the game longer than me are telling me. So I think we all just need to do that.
And speaking of weathering changes, assuming 3 years from now there's a better outlook for us, do you as an organization ever think about how you might rebuild or build back, or what you might do differently if there's a more receptive administration a few years from now?
Definitely. Definitely. I mean,
tell me your dream list.
my dream is lasso for sure. My dream, which is certainly not attainable in any sort of context today, but like I am dedicated to this work for my lifetime. So, I think that 20 years from now, fingers crossed, my health stays intact. I'll still be having some of these conversations, hopefully in a different chapter. But I think like there is a lot of time ahead of us still, like young folks who are in this work, like young leadership. I think we still have a long runway. And I think right now people are ignited to like care about issues that maybe they thought were going to be okay somehow, but they're realizing we're not. So my dream is that we have money to meet the ask of $2.5 billion of community-led land access folks, people who want to keep farming going, people who want farming to continue to exist as a profession in a small scale way, people who are interested in feeding their communities and living like a village farming lifestyle. Like that's what I think a lot of those folks who apply to LCM are. And I think we have conversations about the age of the average farmer, which is oscillates between 58 and 60 over the past 15 years. We have conversations about it and people think it's like this like novice statistic and it doesn't have that much meaning, like it's just age. But when you think about that in the context of like 20, 40, 50 years from now, we're going to ask ourselves, did we support the folks who wanted to come in and take over farming? Like, did we support our national food supply and the next generation of leadership for small farmers? Like, did we actually actively do that? And I want to be able to say yes. I want to be able to say that we created every opportunity that we could for farmers to get on land who wanted to farm. Because I hear from some intergenerational coalitions that they have so many young people in their families, fourth, fifth generation farmers who want to leave the farm. And I'm like, I know a lot of first generation farmers who want to be on that land. And so I just don't want to look back and think that we did young farmers a disservice or people who want to keep this profession going in the way that we're doing it. Like, I don't want to look back and think we didn't do enough. So $2.5 billion is a lot of money, but I know it exists, right? Like, I know that money is in the world. So we just need to get it to ag.
And maybe you could talk for a minute about, I'm just curious about the young farmers. There's this, the divide between those who've been in farming families for generations and don't want anything to do with it, and then the new people who are first generation and really are very passionate about it. And what do you think is going on there? Like when young people come to farming, what is it that they see about it? What draws them in? And is that different from how it's been in the past?
Yeah, I can't speak too much to like the influx of young farmers before our organization existed. So I can speak to like the past 10 or 15 years of our surveys. And what we see is people coming in who are just interested in environmental justice, conservation. These are just folks who like care about the environment and see farming as a way to contribute to a better environment long term, right? Folks who care a lot about climate change and think that ag can be a climate change mitigator and not an instigator in that. Um, and I think that that's where we're seeing a lot of push. We also have, like myself, a lot of folks who come in from a different background that gets you on a farm. So like veterinary medicine, for example, is my background. Like I used to work in large animal veterinary medicine, which is how I became a hog farmer. I am a first generation farmer. I don't have a farm background. I realized very soon on the farm that I cared more about animal husbandry and farming than I did about animal medicine, which is still an interest to me. But like we have an influx of people from veterinary medicine Then there's like a whole industry of public health professionals who come to agriculture for like medicinal purposes, believe in like holistic nutrition, growing things locally, right? There's that whole movement. So we got a lot of different industries of people who see farming as the next step in their career, even though they don't have a traditional farming background. They're coming to ag for a different reason.
Right. Okay. And so it's interesting, this confluence of young farmers and sort of climate concerns. And so I'm curious about how you think, or your organization thinks, that climate programming can happen alongside land access for young farmers. Like, what do you think? What would be the best case scenario if young farmers had access to the capital and the land that they needed? How would climate programming change or happen?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, land access is an obstacle to conservation, right? So I don't think we can talk about one without the other right now in our current context. In a dream world where young farmers have access to land, they would be more focused on conservation and climate and less so on land access, right? Like it's a barrier. There's no conversation to be had about conserving land that you don't have your hands on, or soil that you don't have your fingers in, right? Like it's just a non-starter. So they go hand in hand right now, because a lot of the reason to give farmers access to land, young farmers who care about the environment, is conservation. And so that's the connection that I see between them. And young farmers are, just generally speaking, like climate leaders. Like they're smart, they understand land access is the essential first step in ensuring that young farmers can put into practice climate mitigation techniques. But um, they're also climate leaders. Like when you think about climate change and like who you've seen be like a spokesperson for the mitigation of climate change, it's probably a young person. It's probably someone quite young. And of course, there are like plenty of people across the spectrum who've been working on climate longer than some of us have existed, that I'm not trying to take credit from. But for the most part, when you see someone going really hard about climate and the future, it's usually someone who's going to have to be in that future. Right. And so it's like front of mind for us all the time, because we're growing up in and growing as professionals in an industry that is ever changing for us. Like we've never worked in agriculture with a stable climate. So to us, like it's just a normal thing that we need to accept and embrace and just be dynamic and adaptable about. And I don't see that I see that more in the young farmer population than any other group of farmers. And so I think that's why it's so important to them.
Right. And so it's sort of built in, like their sort of theories of farming have conservation built in at the ground level.
Exactly. They're synonymous. They won't farm without some sort of like conservation, right?
Yeah. And does that necessarily mean putting aside land that doesn't get farmed, or is it farming with a different kind of practice?
Oh, I think there's such a spectrum of conservation practices that exist. You have like low and no-till farming, you have rotational grazing, cover cropping, crop rotation. Like I think it really depends. I will say there is I don't know if it's societal. I certainly see in agriculture the younger generations wanting to bring back and centralize indigenous agricultural practice as like the means of sustainability. I just spent a week in New Mexico talking to a bunch of folks about conservation practices there, with like some funders who had a conference there. And like it's a way of life there. And I think that like it's what some people look to when you look at like sort of severe climates. Like the desert in New Mexico is dry, right? They have like a lot of challenges. And I'm calling in from Denver. There's a lot of challenges with water here in the Colorado River Basin situation. And I think like we're just very keen on these things. And we look to these places that are at the forefront of having to deal with a water crisis or a land crisis or whatever, um, as examples. And I think we like want to use those as a means to understand in the future what other cities might be like who are near those places right now. And so there is a huge push to go to start thinking about indigenous practice, And I see a lot of that trying to be centralized, but I feel like I'm drifting and not answering your original question. So let me
No,
know if there's something
no,
else.
it's
Now I'm
interesting.
just riffing on indigenous practice.
No, I'm a big fan of that. I love listening to people talk about that. But it's also interesting because it's really specific to your site, right? Like what you do, your sort of environmentally, ecologically minded farming in the Southwest is going to be really different than it's going to be in upstate New York. And I love that. Like it's not one size fits all. It's really tailored to context.
Definitely.
I'm a little curious. I didn't realize that you were a veterinarian and you came to be a hog farmer after that. Are you comfortable sharing your story, how you were able to do hog farming? Did you, were you an employee on someone else's farm? Did you create your own?
To be clear, I decided to pursue agricultural economics and policy instead of veterinary medicine. So I never actually became a veterinarian, but I had spent all of my academic and professional career preparing to go to vet school and pissed my parents off and decided not to do that. But basically, yeah, thanks. Hopefully they're not listening. But basically, yeah, I mean, I had spent a lot of time working in small animal medicine. And it's like a natural career path I'm from New Haven, Connecticut. I'm from a small city in New England. I spent a lot of time, I just kind of did what I loved, as a kid. Like I loved spending time with animals and just what I wanted to do. So, I spent a lot of time working in small animal medicine. I realized that I had no shade to small animal medicine. I love small animal vets. I think what they do is really important. I love pets. I have pets, but I wanted to have a bigger impact. And I felt like the food system was calling me in this way that like I grew up, have Italian heritage on my mom's side. So I like food has always been very central to my life. I faced a lot of food insecurity as a kid. And so it was like something that we were always kind of dissecting and having to deal with on like a personal level. And so the food system was just always something that I wanted to understand better. And like the inner workings of the ag system became a part of that when I started working in large animal medicine. So I did an internship at the University of Pennsylvania. They also have a vet school. So my dream was that I would go to the University of Pennsylvania's veterinary school. I went to Haverford undergrad, which is only about 20 minutes from the vet school. So I'd spent some time volunteering there as well, at the emergency room there. And then I did a stint in what's called comparative orthopedics. Um, yeah, and it's like very complicated and borderline, sometimes questionably unethical work that we do to test products out on animals, to like see if they'll work on humans. So you choose animals that are like very akin to human characteristics, and surprisingly enough, hogs and humans have a lot of things in common. And so that's how I got interested in pigs. And at the time when I was doing the comparative orthopedics work, I was working with pigs and goats and sheep. And so they had another facility at the university where it was exclusively hogs. And so I transitioned to working at their hog facility in Kennett Square, which is about an hour from the vet school, but is where they have all their large animals and some really incredible, like world renowned equine medicine going on there, like truly incredible. But that's how I got to hog farming. And so I was doing the projects on the farm, working with our farm veterinarian, working with some of the vet students who were coming through, teaching them regular farm practices. And then I very quickly became farm manager. And I don't know, it just made more sense to me to do the husbandry than to do the medicine. My career prospects for going into veterinary medicine seemed limited, I guess, to me at the time in comparison to like this new world that I had been opened up to.
Right. Right. It's such an interesting path.
Yeah, it's very non-traditional.
I think we should probably start wrapping up. Maybe a good way to wrap up is to ask you if there's anything that we, meaning anyone who's listening or anyone who's doing food systems work, can do, in response to the sort of chaos that's happening in the last 5 months with the new administration and the funding freezes? Is there any course of action beyond waiting it out?
So I think, my communications director would be really angry with me if I didn't say that we have a farm, the Young Farmer Action Network. So if you're interested in joining any of the actions that we have at the coalition, you can join our action network on our website, youngfarmers.org. You can also sign up for our newsletter there. You can become a member, keep yourself engaged. We have lots of opportunities for advocacy, no matter who you are, no matter who you represent, whether you're an individual or you represent an institution, like there's plenty of ways to engage. If you have the means, everyone's looking for donations right now. It's a powerful time to make an investment. $20 means a lot more now than it did 12 months ago. So, if you do have the means and you are a funder listening in, you're interested in young farmers, please, would love to tell you more. So those are the things I will say from the young farmer's perspective. From my perspective, my ask these days is that people really, as individuals, try to fight against this hyper normalization of what's happening right now and the cognitive dissonance that I think is bringing some people peace, but is creating a lot of gray area for the movement. And I think everybody has to cope the best way they can. And I know folks are struggling right now, but the level of hypernormalization that I am seeing happen is alarming to me. And I worry that we are not actually seeing what's happening to us, or we're just like, it's not affecting me in my day-to-day life every single day. So I'm okay. But that has an expiration date. Excuse me. That has an expiration date, no matter who you are. um, I don't think any of us are safe enough to say that we will never see the impacts of this. Eventually, it will be you too. So just think about the broader society if you can, however you can these days.
It's amazing work that you're doing, and I love your vision for the future, and I love that
Thanks.
you're all doing what you can.
We are.
I like your vision, and I hope we get to be in that someday.
Yeah, me too. And I have hope. I mean, I really do. I do think this is just a chapter in policy. I think there will be another time and we'll look back at this and we'll still all feel a little bit of pain, but hopefully we'll be living in a different reality. So, until then, we build momentum and just keep our heads up.